is 7:03 PM, and I am calling the October 17th, 2023 meeting of the Hamilton Planning Board to order. This meeting is being recorded. Our first order of business, as usual, is to take roll call. So when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton? Jonathan Poor?
Present.
Bill Wheaton?
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist?
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr?
Present.
Matt Hamel, I believe is on Zoom, and Marnie Crouch, present. And I did receive a communication from Rick Mitchell, and he indicated that he was planning to attend the meeting, but that he might be about 15 minutes late. So if none of the members have any objection,
Recording in progress.
I would like to postpone consideration of the stormwater management bylaw until Rick arrives and we can take up the A&R request. So if the applicant or its attorney, their attorney, I should say, is present, perhaps you could explain the nature of the A&R request.
Yes. Thank you. Philip Blake here on behalf of Betsy Spang and Tom Spang. Betsy is here. We're doing a lot line adjustment as shown on the plan to essentially carve out a small non-buildable lot that would be conveyed and connected with their adjacent parcel on which they live. So the lot from which it's been taken has been, sort of moved around a few times over its history. These properties used to go east-west, and then they went north-south, and then they went east-west, but most recently endorsed by an A&R plan, I believe, in 1994. Nothing has changed. The current conveyance or the lot line adjustment would leave it with, close to 250,000 square feet. It's got two sets of frontage, one with 175, from which the access would come, and the other one with about 65 feet of frontage. So it's got about 230 feet of frontage in total, 250,000 square feet of area. And, again, the lot numbering would result in a new non-buildable lot of 11,183 square feet from Assessor's Lot 11, which would be joined with the parcel next door, map 72, lot 7. So in a nutshell, it's pretty, hopefully fairly straightforward.
Right.
So the surveyor would bring this in, but he's not available tonight, and so I'm kind of a last minute sub in and hopefully can answer any questions you have.
Well, what is the purpose of the adjustment in the lot sizes?
It's not about the lot size. It is because the Spangs want to have a barn on their property, and just the way the lot is laid out, this is the logical spot for it, kind of in line with their house. And so they just can't do it without adjusting the lot line. Fortunately, they own the adjacent parcel and can do it. So it's just basically a practical issue.
Well, that, if it's a horse barn, that always resonates with me, so.
I think it's going to have a pitchfork in it.
Oh, good. We like to maintain our equestrian traditions.
Yeah.
Do any board members have any questions for Mr. Lake?
Marnie, just in my review, it's a simple switch of about 11,000 square feet from one lot to another lot, just to make it larger for the purpose that Phil had mentioned to us. Doesn't change any frontages, doesn't change any accessibility, so it's approved.
You don't think I don't even think it needs an A&R.
It does.
It does?
Because
Okay.
that portion of land, you see there, Lot 3, that's cross-hatched in your graphics there. It's moving to lot number 1A.
Anybody else have any questions?
There are no houses, are there, on lot 2?
It's existing Lot 2, it would become 2A. There are no houses on there,
Okay,
so, yeah.
okay.
If there are no other questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the A&R.
Second?
I think I need,
So moved, sorry.
A second?
Yes.
so when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you approve of the motion? Pat Norton?
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor, aye. Oh,
Jonathan.
sorry.
I think we're both being a little over
anticipating
enthusiastic, so
what you're saying. Sorry. Jonathan Poor.
trying to help Phil out here, so.
Trying to move this along.
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Hart, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye.
Great, thank you so much.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I was going to short-circuit everything for you.
At some point, we need to have all of the members sign the 2 Mylars there on the table.
Okay, don't let us leave without doing that.
Thank you.
Well, so I will take up the stormwater management bylaw and the associated handout. Patrick, do I need to read the notice of public hearing?
Either you or the clerk. Typically, the clerk does.
Emil, you're up. Here it is.
He gets he has a very powerful position on the
Yes.
board.
He has a more powerful voice than I do.
This is notice of public hearing, October 17, 2023. The Hamilton Planning Board will hold a public hearing on October 17, 2023 at 7 p.m. in the Memorial Room, Hamilton Town Hall, 577 Bay Road, and via Zoom to consider proposed changes to Chapter 19 of the town's bylaws, which are specific to stormwater management. The proposed changes are posted on the Planning Board's webpage as part of the town's website, www.hamiltonmass.gov. The Zoom dial code will be made available prior to the hearing and posted on the town's website and the October 17, 2023 Planning Board agenda. Any person interested or wishing to be heard on the proposed changes to the town's stormwater management bylaw may appear at the time and place designated. And is signed Margaret Crouch, Chairperson.
Great. Before I turn the discussion over to questions or suggestions from the public, I want to just indicate to board members that, consistent with our discussions at the last meeting, we did add a definition of Massachusetts Massachusetts water quality standards. And then in section 6, we did include an application process for administrative land disturbance review. And consistent with Bill Wheaton's suggestion with respect to an instrument survey, we indicated that it should include or must include all information required by Section 4. And we added that same requirement to the stormwater management permit. And I believe those were the only three substantive changes that were made from the last iteration of the bylaw. So in reviewing this bylaw, did any members find any typos or errors or need for corrections of any kind?
Nope.
None. Do any of the individuals here tonight have any comments about this stormwater management bylaw? Anyone on Zoom? Well, that's good. So looks like we have our work cut out for us with respect to the regulations, which we'll have to start
Yes.
thinking about right away. So I'm going to postpone for a bit, a motion to approve this bylaw until Rick comes. I did email him and just ask him if he had any questions, concerns, or had found any typos in the bylaw, and he said he had found none. So when he arrives, I think we will be in a position to vote to approve this bylaw and transmit it to the town manager for inclusion on the warrant. And as I reported at the last meeting, both the Select Board and I believe the FinCom are going to recommend approval of this bylaw. So the other matter that we have here is the handout that will be available at town meeting on November 6th. I believe I gave you a copy at the last meeting, but in reviewing it, I did notice that I had failed to make the correction, I believe in enforcement, where in the last iteration, it referenced the planning board instead of the permitting authority. So I have made that correction. So does anyone have any comments about the handout? I know Patrick sent around the corrected version.
I don't think it's in our set, is it, here?
Yeah, it is. Just before the stormwater management chapter.
Page 2.
17.
Barney, the document does a good job of summarizing the proposed amendments. I didn't know if it's typical for this document to also summarize the purpose for making them, or is that
I think
a foregone conclusion of?
I think that might be part of the short introduction that I will have to make at town meeting.
Got it.
But since you just took the floor, I want to thank you and Alex for taking the laboring oar with respect to this bylaw. It's really a good job, and I'm glad you did it. And now you're charged with the regulations, which are going to be more difficult, I think. What do you
Yeah.
think?
We've already started, and hopefully making it more simple,
Right,
is the objective.
right. But it also,
Make something simple.
you know, that's exactly, it's really true. It's easy to make things complex. We do have to make sure that we include all the new elements from the bylaw into the regulations with respect to the administrative land disturbance review and all that,
Right.
all those elements. But I think you're very much up to the task. So if no one else has any comments,
I have one quick comment.
Oh, sure.
First, I'd also like to thank Alex and Patrick for all the work. It's excellent. And then I also kind of wanted to echo the question that Pat had about the why for this.
right,
And what a thought that I have, and others may disagree, is in presenting this at town meeting, I think it could be thoughtful and useful to balance this with a vision or a picture that's bigger than just reacting to Bridge Street.
oh, definitely.
And that, I don't presume to know what you'd be saying, but these are just some thoughts that I would like to share. That as the town, embarks on a period where less and less of the land is easy to develop, these are important changes kind of globally for the town. It's not just a reaction to what's happening at Bridge
Right.
Street. That's all.
No, I think that's absolutely right. We want to make the point that this is not just reactive, but it's proactive.
Yes, yes, that's all.
No, I agree
So,
with you 100%.
thank you again.
Yeah. No, you've made the point before about the difficulty in developing the remaining land that is left to be developed, and the importance of a bylaw
Yes.
like this to make sure it's done thoughtfully.
And it may require more revisions in the future as more and more complex land attempts to be developed, so.
Right, right.
That's
But
all.
I think that
I think-
we've really made a good start.
Yes.
And I think that we should be proud of this product. I certainly am. And Rick, just in time.
To vote?
Yes, but you can make any comments that you want about the bylaw or the handout, if you have any.
I don't.
Okay, but perfect timing. So I would entertain a motion to approve the stormwater management bylaw, that's Chapter 29 of the Hamilton General Bylaw, and to transmit it to Joe Demilovitz for inclusion on the warrant.
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
So when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you approve of the motion? Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Her, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. And so in transmitting this bylaw, I can also report that the planning board was unanimous in approving it. And then with respect to the handout at town meeting, I don't think it would hurt to have a motion to transmit this to Joe Demilovitz and the town moderator, Bill Bowler, to ascertain whether or not they will approve its distribution at town meeting.
I move to approve the proposed amendments to Chapter 29 Stormwater Management Bylaw.
We already did that. This is the handout.
This is the handout. That's, okay, that's the way it's titled, but.
Oh,
okay.
right. Oh, sorry. I apologize. Yes.
Okay, the handout, if
The
it's,
handout.
that's the name. Okay.
So, do I have a second?
Second?
So when I call your name, Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Her, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Great. Very pleased that we got that done. Okay, and now we can turn our sights on a status report regarding the Browns Hill Overlay District. And I know Dr. Barnes is here. And Dr. Barnes, if you want to provide us with a status report as to developments at Gordon Conwell, we'd love to hear it.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Ken Barnes with Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. I think we were going to bring up the PowerPoint presentation. I spoke to Patrick about it before the meeting, Patrick Reffert. So if we could do that, I just think it would be helpful. Then everybody can have something to look at, and we can see what we're talking about. This is really about just getting some clarification. As I indicated the last time we spoke, I think we are very, very close in terms of what we would like to see, what the market would like to see, and what the planning board would like to see. And that's good. That's what everybody was hoping to find, a situation where everybody would have a win-win situation. So the first slide, second slide technically, after the title slide. There you go. So that's the concept plan with the different neighborhoods that we've all seen. And at this point, I would say that that's, I think everybody agrees that that's what it's going to look like. And we had a couple of questions about where to draw some of the lines, and we can have, a final discussion about that at some point. But generally speaking, we get exactly what it is you're trying to do. If you go to the next page, the next slide, this is from Table 5, and what we want to concentrate in terms of these clarifying questions is the new dwelling unit density. So I'm happy to say that we aren't looking for any more units than the 98 units you've allotted for, or any more square footage than the 234,000 square footage that you've allotted for. We're not pushing back on that at all. If you go to the next slide, which is Table 1, these are the areas on the left that we are asking questions about. So let's skip the first one for a minute and go to North Residential. There's no questions there. We have a checkbox. That's the 109 existing apartments plus 10% extra for code and all the things we've talked about. That sounds good to us. Skip the next one and go to SRC. The 40 existing apartments, that would be C and D, plus 10%. That makes sense to us. Skipping the next one, going to SD, which is the south development, that's buildings A and B, since the existing apartments, and you put in 15% extra for that one. I don't know if that was a typo, or if you think those buildings somehow need an extra 5%, and we're not gonna argue about it if you do. So,
No, actually, those were to be 10%, and C and D were to be 15%. So we'll make that change.
okay, so you just wanted to flip it.
Yeah.
That would make more sense, but I took it just the way you had it on Table 1. So you'll flip Table 1, those two sections.
Yeah, just as a note here, the board has not approved any of this yet.
Oh, I understand.
You know, we got to
Yeah.
the point where we've laid out everything, but we haven't gone back over and cross-checked everything on this.
No, I understand, but we just want to let you know that,
Yeah.
as you can see, there's not an awful lot of pushback going on here. We understand exactly what you're trying to do. So let's talk about the Browns Hill, and we're talking about the R, not the C, which is the top one, and then the third one, which is the center, and it's CR again, it's residential. And then the next one down is the Stables, and again, that's R. So if you look at what is in that table and Table 5, if you go back and forth between Table 5 and Table 1, you see that the suggestion in the illustrative plan is 46 new dwelling units comprising approximately 120,000 square feet. The other section, the center section, is 36 new dwelling units comprising approximately 68,000 square feet. And then the area in front of the stables, 18 new dwelling units comprising approximately 46,000 square feet. So if you go to the next slide, this is what it looks like on your illustrative plan. And by the way, down on the right where it says 36 new DUs, that should be 34. That's my typo.
34 is
Yeah, it's 34. Otherwise, it comes to 100, not 98. But I'm a theologian, not a mathematician. So it's 46, 36, and 18. That's your plan. That's your illustrative plan. That's fantastic. Let's go to the next slide, if I may. And this is what we think is the kind of thing that's going to happen. And this is why we kept saying we want to wait for the market. If you look at what is being proposed there, the apartments are the apartments are the apartments. We would like to keep Kerr Hall and Retreat House and Pilgrim Hall. We have that nice contiguous campus there. And it doesn't interrupt the heritage landscape. It doesn't interrupt what you're trying to do there. We agree. We love it when we drive up there. We want people like Valerie, who lives right next to the heritage landscape, to look out a window and see that every day. We're all for what's happening here. But instead of scraping the entire hill, we would like to see about half of that hill developed because we want to keep Kerr Hall. And on the central campus, yes, we say, let's go and see that developed. So instead of 98 units set over 3 sections, because we don't want anything in front of Pilgrim Hall. It's 98 units spread over 2 sections. So the clarification questions we're asking is, if something like that were to happen, would that be considered in keeping with the spirit, as it were, of the illustrative plan, requiring the abbreviated special permit? And then in terms of the square footage per unit, you have a broad spectrum, 1,800 up to 3,000. The probability is whoever builds here may want something a little more uniform, so you could end up with, you know, a lot of them that are 2,000 or 2,400 or something like that. Maybe not quite as broad a spectrum as what you've proposed. But to me, those are really the only clarifying questions we have right now, because we envision this going in exactly the direction you guys are looking, and one that hopefully will make our neighbors happy as well.
So, some questions.
Sure.
You want to scrape only part of the top of the hill,
That's right. The library and the academic center, which are circled,
right?
and there's also a very, very big space behind that, as you know.
Right.
And we would like to stay in Kerr Hall. And
Kerr Hall is mostly classrooms now.
Kerr Hall is a little bit of everything. It's administration, it's classes, it's a big student space, it's all that. We would move our library and our chapel almost certainly into Kerr Hall. And we would renovate Retreat House, bring it back to its glory, renovate Pilgrim Hall, and that would be Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary.
Well, I guess I'll open up with a few comments. The metrics, what you're looking at are the number of dwelling units, the ones that you're using for the new build-out. That's only part of the illustrative plan. To come up, what we did there was come up with a capacity to essentially test with the public. That's how we came about that, creating something of a particular nature. But the other critical part was the form-based aspect to the code, where the form does matter. The idea being, we wanted to limit the size of any particular building to something no larger than the retreat building. Any building that would, or other neighboring houses, large estate houses in the neighborhood. We wanted to keep everything at that scale, so that this whole site would blend in much better with the surrounding neighborhoods.
Yeah,
We also, let me just finish.
Go ahead, sorry.
But we also wanted the variety of housing in there, hence the townhouse, hence the duplex, multiplex, and other house forms in there that we wanted to introduce into the concept. That was important, and we did that in relation to the Pilgrim Hall structure, because we felt that was an area where there could be compatibility, a symbiosis between the two, and actually makes sense from a neighborhood layout and so forth. So that was critical, again, in our thinking, to come up with an illustrative plan. As you know, you're obviously free to present anything you like, but if you wanted to ask whether this is approaching the illustrative plan, I'm pointing out that it doesn't in some ways comport with that, which is fine, but it just doesn't put it in that category from my perspective. I mean, everybody else will weigh in on this. So, and as far as getting 46 units in where you would like to see, where the existing library, academic building, chapel is, that's going to force kind of a large building in there to get surface parking available. You're using, less than half the site for that particular use. We put in the duplex, essentially filling up the entire top of the hill with the housing to spread them out a little bit, get a little more space between them. So you're forcing kind of a different housing type. And again, it seems to me that the building is going to be a much larger building. Again, you're entitled to do that, to submit that. But those at first blush anyway are, for me anyway, kind of significant changes from what.
I would echo exactly the same thing. As I look at the two plans, you're going to squeeze at least 46, maybe not, because we don't know how many will go on the middle campus, just 98 total. But you're going to squeeze at least 46 on, arguably a little less than half of the land on which we were going to put the full 46. And if I sit and look at the plans, that would be that would be more, denser, taller apartment buildings almost to handle that many units on that little bit of land. That's going to require different parking. You still need parking for your maintained Kerr Hall. That's going to be very tight up there. I think that's the way. It's certainly going to be much tighter than what we had envisaged in the plan here for that top of the hill.
Yeah, let me just address that, if I may, for a moment, because you're right about that in terms of the top of the hill. Basically, if for argument's sake we're using half of the hill, that's in ballpark 10 acres, and in the center is ballpark 6 acres, you're at almost the exact same density in terms of units per acre that you've put into the center. So we're sort of saying, what you're doing in the center, do both in the center on the hill and on the hill. That's kind of the thinking. We did think about what that would come to, but we don't have an exact number. This is not obviously a plan. It's just a general discussion about if those are your densities, we think the market will live with those densities. It's just, and I think everybody understands the form issue, right? They have to look like they fit, has to be the right feel, et cetera. That's fine. But the clarification we're trying to understand is densities, because we need to be able to tell the people who've come to us and made offers based on what they read online, right? 98 units. We just need to be able to tell them that, hey, we've had this conversation and we think it's possible, or it's a non-starter, or it's somewhere in between. That's what we're looking at.
I think that the takeaway is that what you're proposed here is not consistent with any of the illustrative plans. That said, we wouldn't, the way the overlay district is drafted now, put that in the abbreviated special permit category. But that doesn't mean that what's proposed would not be viewed favorably if it has the same amount of density, as long as the stormwater and wastewater and all those other criteria were satisfied. Because clearly, there are components of what you're showing here. I'm assuming that the access to the site, perhaps the walkways, the preservation of the historic landscape, these are in the buffer areas. These are all very important and consistent with the planning board preferences. So I commend you for that portion of it. And so even if it fell into the special permit category, the closer it was to an illustrative plan, probably the more favorably the planning board's going to look at it. Would everyone agree with that?
I would just like to add that in addition...
Just tell me if that's your thinking.
I agree, and I agree with everything everybody said, and there are quite a number of components that go into the illustrative plan.
Right.
So it's everything that Emil said,
Right.
what Bill said, what you said, and a few more things. And the few more things are the fact that the illustrative plans are organized around meaningful open space, walkable communities, making sure that they fit like puzzle pieces with adjacent buffers, making sure they fit like puzzle pieces with existing buildings, which is not to say you can't come up with 50 flavors of that. But there are a lot of components that go into the commonality that makes the illustrative plan.
Right, so in a sense, you're asking us to approve a bit of a hypothetical. And so this is very generalized. And so we would actually have to.
I think I'm not asking to approve that, Madam Chair. What I would say is I'm trying to get a feel for how far off, a developer would be if their expectation was that if they're within the density, then they're going to have a pretty good shot.
Well, the
Because-
planning,
Well, that gets to the question of what's the minimum density that the developers are telling you they need to make this project work?
They aren't giving us minimums, but they've looked online. They've picked up that number, that 98 number. And they've come back to us and said, oh, we can live with that number. So, okay, but they understand there's other elements to the form-based zoning. So, you know, if we go back to them and we say, look, doing it this way doesn't conform to any of the current illustrative plans. Okay. But, as the chair has said, it certainly meets a lot of the spirit of what everyone's trying to do in terms of keeping the look and the feel and the density, et cetera. And we will stay and be neighbors, right? So we also want it to look and feel like it belongs in the neighborhood. So instead of coming back to you and saying, oh, the market has spoken to us, and they want to put 200 units. Someone said that. We got an offer. They want to put 200 units on. I have not come back to you with a request because I know that's just going to blow up the whole thing you've tried to do. And we're trying, as you know, to get a win-win out of this. We're really trying to work with you. So what I'm saying is, if the densities are, you know, respected, if they can find a way to respect the other elements of your indicative plan, we would hope that they would be treated,
Let me raise an issue that's
Sure.
different than density,
okay?
which is the mixing of uses. So what you're proposing on the top of the hill is two very tight neighbors, one 46 or 50 or 60 residential units right next door to, let's call it educational use, classrooms, library. The original campus was laid out to keep those two uses separate. The classrooms and the libraries were on the top, and the residential was on the bottom. Presumably, because like a lot of planners might say, well, they shouldn't really be on top of one another. Now, in trying to do what you would like to do to the top of Hill now, you are mixing these two uses very closely together. Furthermore, they're not even affiliated uses. That is to say, the proposal is that the housing would be private market, I guess, and that the remaining educational buildings would be the residual enterprise of Gordon Theological Seminary. And that would raise an obvious question, without being too pessimistic here. Is there a Chinese wall here? That is to say, you're building housing next to the educational institutions, market housing, but sooner or later, somehow or other, all that housing is going to be occupied by faculty, students, or people affiliated with the theological seminary, because after all, it's a pretty short commute, only 100 feet between all of these new housing units and the let's call it rehabbed educational buildings. So the two questions are, the campus was originally laid out to separate these two. Now the two are joined together. Is it really going to be market rate housing and educational institutions, which would be the only Dover Amendment land that would be left would be there's some little square around Kerr Hall? And is there any indication that the residential units will somehow, sooner or later, be occupied by people who work right next door?
My guess is no. As I said, this is why I kept saying, let's wait for the market. These developers seem to think that market rate housing
Right next to an educational institution is not a problem.
Not a problem, because, you know, it's not a high school or even a college. It's a theological seminary. These are mature students, and it's a small population of students, very small. As you may know, there's a big movement right now for over 55 housing on college campuses, because people, when they retire, say they want to live on campus so that they can take advantage of the arts and the music and the, being around young people and being mentors and whatnot. There's quite a movement toward that. What we're saying here is the developers have come to us. We didn't go to them. They came to us and they said, we like that hill. we're happy to put something up there. And they don't see any problem with the fact that it's close to us, and we don't see any problem with the fact that we're close to them. I think, Bill, that the way the current campus is laid out was really an accident more than anything else. It wasn't designed that way. No one purposely said, let's do this. They looked for the easiest place to put up the apartments, nice big flat area down not far from the road. They put the apartments there. So I don't think, we know there was never a master plan for how the academic buildings and the residential buildings would go together. And by the way, Kerr Hall is a residential building as well. There's 106 residential units there for our unmarried students.
What I would say, there's also an opportunity there to kind of address what Bill just said. There's an opportunity there in that the water tanks offer, in a sense, a natural buffer, and the water tanks aren't the entire zone in there. There's sort of a berm around the water tanks, which are landscapable. So it's possible, I'm not suggesting exactly how you design this, but I think there are ways to create a meaningful buffer between those two uses, more so than what's visible right now, because there are aprons around those water tanks that are landscapable, and you could
Yeah,
create.
but that also
natural-
goes to the density issue. Not only are you trying to fit 46 units on there, but you can't fit it on all of the land at the top of the hill because a third or a quarter of the land is devoted to the water tank. So it's very, very tight, which is another word for it's going to have to be very, very more vertical.
Right.
With less area for parking. It's going to be a very dense residential development if you're trying to squeeze it on half of the top of the hill, and furthermore, leave all the land around the water tank
Which
undisturbed.
gets to my point is the developers need to tell you what their minimum unit count is on that acreage. And my next question is, the student housing, what are the developers proposing there?
Market rate,
Market rate? Any affordable components?
that's up to the town.
No, it could be up to the developer. They can propose market rate housing with 25% affordable, making all 209 units affordable housing and getting us over our SHI requirement.
They could, but that's not their interest. Their interest is in market rate.
Totally market rate.
That's right, and we're being agnostic about it at this point.
Rental?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think this is interesting conversation about what could be and the challenges in what's being proposed. The seminary have obviously done the ask that's been all along, which is to comment on what the illustrative plan had shown previously. My question now is what to do next. Is the goal here to really truly develop an overlay district, to go over the town and get approved and then get issued, and then have the developers be encouraged to do what is shown in the plans? Or is this just gauge the temperature on what's been drafting, and they're going to go ahead and, are we going to react to a project? I guess, where's the priority for the town now? Because we've got a lot of good feedback from the neighborhood. I'd like to see there's no street now connecting Woodbury, I don't think. There's this just
We
dash.
don't envision that.
But anyways, I guess what to do now, is the goal here to develop and engage and agree on a development plan, establish an overlay district sometime next year, middle of next year, I guess is the earliest it could be done, right? Given the schedule of the town meetings and whatnot. Or is this an effort to gauge temperature feedback so that a developer could make an offer, you could go back and say, hey, there was no strong reaction?
No, that's a great question, but no.
Just what to do next, where to prioritize our
Yeah,
effort.
we've been committed to this process since the day we were invited to get involved in it.
Yeah.
And all we're trying to do now is share with you what the market has told us, and share with you what you've asked us many times, what does the seminary want? And based on what you have envisioned, everyone knowing that it was, it was based on ideas, not based on anything concrete. What you want, what the market is telling us makes sense, and what we would like to see. So, I don't see any reason why we can't continue to work on this overlay district, and I can And we are still very committed to no later than the spring now, because it's been pushed back a couple of times, and I do think we're very close. Then I can go back to the people who have come to us and say to them, look, these are the constraints. This is what the town had in mind. And yes, there's the get out of jail free card, which is you can come back with anything, and it'll be special permit and take your luck. We would like it to be much closer to an illustrative plan so that they can have a faster route, right, through the abbreviated process, which is why I came back and asked, hey, if we stay under certain thresholds, does that get us close enough? What I'm hearing is close, no cigar, but that's okay. At least we can have a conversation with them and say, these are the risks, these are the parameters. And they can then look at it and come back and say, okay, you know what, we're gonna engage with you. We're going to have a purchase and sale agreement. It's going to be contingent on approval. We understand what the risks are, but in the meantime, together we have created an overlay district that protects the things you want to protect and allows us to do what we need to do as well. That's what we've always wanted, and I think we're very close to that.
Well, that's how I took this whole meeting. What the point was, clarification, and that you've come to us and say, this is our understanding of what you had written in the code. Is that correct? And we're saying, as far as the numbers are concerned, you're correct in terms of what's proposed. And we're responding that, and we're trying to envision, without seeing an alternative to the illustrative plan, we have spent enough time on this site to really study it and place buildings, and every building is placed and every street was placed for a reason. It was because of clearances for surface parking. It was for getting the right spatial relationships, get them tight together, promoting a little bit of density. So we went through all of those steps. So we're able to look at the plan, and when you see that only half of the hill is circled as proposed residential, we say, well, okay, then maybe 23 units could fit there, not 46. You're saying 46, that's essentially doubling the building sizes to get everybody in there. So
That's the question I'm asking. Because if I have to go back to the developers and say,
and that's what we're able to tell you. Or if you're eliminating all of the townhouses in front of the Pilgrim Hall, for example, that's now wide open, so you're going to concentrate those now in the central part, so that would change that. So again, you're looking at the metric of density, which has been a problem with conventional zoning, with Euclidean zoning from the beginning. Density is the worst thing you can rely on as a planning tool. It is terrible. And that's why they've dropped it in a lot of, we were asked to put it in, but the square footage was more in line with what we were thinking about.
yeah,
And, but we also did the illustrative plan to demonstrate what is possible there with using the ideas that we had created and the preferences that the planning board had come up with, which you've honored. I mean, most of them anyway, the historic landscape.
yeah,
heritage landscape
that's
and
what we want to do. We wanted to honor that. We've-
buffers, especially on the Bridge Street, with residential, going with maybe a 50-foot buffer up there.
Right.
We understand that, but our first reaction, or at least my reaction on this, is that I see things that are not comporting to the illustrative plan. I'm wondering, well, how are you going to do it and maintain the same density without dramatic changes to the form? And that's kind of key. So I'm happy to have discussions about this, but maybe as a next step, if they wanted to come with a schematic or illustrative plan on their own, and as an informal, I guess, we could probably think about it.
I think that would be a great idea. I mean, I'm happy to sit down with them and say, look, guys, to paraphrase the chair, you're close but no cigar. So your comments are right. In the CRC, in a sense, if nothing changed, there's 34 units there, and it meets the illustrative plan perfectly. So then the question becomes, what can reasonably be done on the hill? If 46 or whatever the number we've bandied about is too much, well, let's figure out what wouldn't be too much and would still keep in with what you're trying to do with the form, because we get that. And if that turns out to be a number lower than 98, then that's life in the big city. And I say to the developer, if you want to be able to have an abbreviated special permit, then come up with something that's going to more comport to the concerns that you have. That's fine. I'm just the messenger there. I'm not trying to squeeze this thing to get every drop out of it. We're staying. We want to do what's right. We want to do what looks good. We want to respect our neighbors. So that's why I'm here.
You know, at this juncture, I know John Whitten is here, and John, I'm wondering if you have any reaction to the discussion that we've been having and can offer any comments, because again, the development agreement is going to be integral to anything that happens here. And so I'm wondering, John, what your thinking is at this juncture.
Sure, and good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Barnes. No, I've learned a lot listening to Dr. Barnes this evening and seeing the presentation. I think, frankly, I'd like to kind of reserve my comments until after I've had a chance to look more carefully at the presentation. But I think what you said at the beginning, Madam Chair, is really the most important part, which is the draft allows for the concept plan consistency or not, allows an applicant to not ignore, but push aside the concept plan and develop their own plan subject to the requirements of the draft. So I think what I've heard Dr. Barnes propose is consistent with the way the bylaw is drafted in its current form. It allows compliance with the concept plan, or it allows an applicant to go outside of compliance, but it's a larger burden or a more difficult burden. And I think what I'm hearing tonight is this proposal is a little bit of both. There are aspects that seem to comply with the concept plan, and then there are aspects where I think Dr. Barnes or whoever the applicant would be wants to kind of go on their own. And again, I think the bylaw accommodates both options. So, I'd be happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair, but I'd like to reserve comment just because I'm not quite sure what the formal proposal is at this point.
I think that the bottom line is everybody wants more detail.
Okay.
Would that be
Yes,
the case?
and one other specific clarification, just in terms of your presentation. Number one, it's important to understand that the apartments in the bylaw and the illustrative plans are expressed as a square footage rather than number of units. So in other words, that's an important distinction. In other words, you've listed out the dorms as being a measure of a number of units. We're listing them out as square footage. So that could be more units or fewer units, but it's that building footprint plus the 10%. So that's just a minor clarification to be careful that a developer doesn't get lost on, well, I get 98 units no matter what it takes, whatever size I want. And then the other piece is that your district map is a little out of date, so you should use the most up-to-date
I
district
thought
map.
I had the most up-to-date. If you could send me the most recent, I would
It should be
appreciate it.
on
Patrick,
the,
would
should
that
be
be
the one on the
possible?
website, right?
If I could get the most recent.
Emil, can you quote the correct date?
And just for clarification, you said all these are going to be rental units?
Well, it would appear, well,
Okay.
not the new dwelling units. Those would probably, they could be condominiums or over 55s or any number of things. They're new
Oh,
builds.
just the student housing? you're
Student
talking-
housing
Okay. I was.
is not going to change. We've
Right,
talked
that's
about that
fine.
many times.
I just didn't know about the new housing, if that was going to be like people buying or if it was more rentals.
Good question. I mean, again, we've just been receiving over the last 2 weeks the offers, and different people have different visions of this.
Right.
And so, we just to say what Rick, to address what Rick said, we'd like to see a set aside, frankly, for affordability, because that's good for our students and it's good for the town, and but the people who are making the offers, they're thinking commercially, and so that'll be part of the give and take.
So these developers that you've been talking to, they have no interest in the student apartments on the lower part of the hill?
Oh, yeah, but
What
they
we've been
tend to be
talking
different, they tend to be different developers. We have developers who have expressed an interest in the apartments,
And then new
the existing ones, and then we have developers who've expressed interest in the other areas.
So I think what would be most helpful is if you're developers came back with a plan that comports with what you've suggested in terms of Browns Hill and the other areas in terms of the density of housing they need to make this economically viable for them.
Well, what I think maybe, Rick, the best thing to do is what Emil recommended is the possibility of drafting a new illustrative plan, as it were.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, which takes into account all of those things. So I'll be in touch when we get closer to choosing the most probable developer, because I'm happy to say there's a few that are interested. But at the end of the day, folks, we're awfully close, and that's the good news, you know. That's what I think we're all happy about.
Well, I have to commend you. We're finally getting traction because we have something we can actually react to as opposed to promises. So it's nice to actually see that we've got some engagement going here. So I think the ball is in your court in terms of coming back, selecting the developer you want to work with, and coming back with some very concrete plans for the number of units and how those fit into the existing illustrative plan. Because the closer it is, the better chance that we can go to an abbreviated special permit as opposed to a longer, more complex process.
That works for us. Any other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marty, you want to take any public comment on this one?
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Who is that guy?
Jake Fumara, 139 Essex Street. So a lot of things have gone through my head. I feel like I guess it's 18, 24 months now that we've been talking about this. And I agree with Rick, it does feel like we're, I guess, making some progress. But since we're all throwing out different ideas for plans, I figured I could throw one out. I am a real estate developer. It's what I do for a career. Been doing it for over 25 years. The one thing that I'll tell you is that this is just dollars and cents. Like when you ask what's the minimum, you just cut down the number of units. And it's just the price goes down to, Professor Wheaton knows this, the price goes down to Gordon Conwell. So I think the question we should be asking, what's the minimum price that Gordon's looking to get? And I know Dr. Barnes can't answer that. He can't answer that in public. But that's really the way to ask the question is, what's the minimum amount of money that Gordon Conwell wants to get? Because in truth, the town should be entitled to a lot of that money. Because what's happening here is we're changing the zoning and changing the neighborhood so that Gordon can profit by adding housing in. There are some things that we can get that I think are valuable. I think we can deal with our affordable housing. I think we could potentially create some senior housing, things like that. The idea of the overlay, we're getting farther and farther away from that. It was a great thought in my eyes, but now instead what should happen? Dr. Barnes should cut off the site that he wants to keep, give it to a developer, and get a developer in here to go through the special permit process with us. I think that's the only way that you can go through it. Either that, or I'll give you another thought. Take the 209 units, come in here and say, we want to sell the 209 units with this many acres attached to it. And it should be a lot. It's 209 units in the town of Hamilton. Attach that many acres, say we're going to make it 25% affordable, and this is who we want to sell it to. And the rest stays under the Dover Amendment, and they don't get any further value, extra value for that. So I live across the street on about 5 acres. I won't get a benefit from this overlay district. There's a part of me that says, geez, I really wish I could put me in the overlay too, so that if someday I want to sell my lot and make apartments for me, my family can benefit from this, not just the business of Gordon Conwell. But I wouldn't do that to my neighbors because that's not the neighborhood that we moved into. So I do appreciate how far we've come and how full circle, and I do think that there's still an opportunity to deal with the 209 units, but adding more and more units by coming in here and saying, well, if we parse this out, we'll shift the 98 over here. I agree with you on density. Density is a terrible sort of metric to use, particularly when you get into a suburban setting. In an urban setting, density makes more sense. Set the height at 250 feet, you can figure out where everything works. In a suburban setting, and I've said this in the last meeting, you go up in a helicopter, none of this fits. It doesn't fit in Hamilton, in this neighborhood at all. It's a rural setting. And this is before I get into, so I've spent some time looking through the streets and things like that. I still am coming to the same troubled aspect of it. Feels like the tail wagging the dog, that we're not spending money and saying, instead of letting the number of units drive the traffic, how much traffic can this neighborhood handle? And then let that drive what's gonna happen with the units, and push on the septic. Somebody come up with a septic plan that's gonna make the town happy, the neighbors happy, things like that. So, and the only one who's gonna spend money in doing this is a developer. It's not Gordon, it's not the town, because the townspeople aren't gonna vote to do it, and Gordon doesn't wanna spend the money. We gotta get a developer in here, and that's sort of like where we're at. So, I'm happy to keep coming to these meetings. I'm happy to get up here and give everybody my thoughts. And in truth, now I'm here saying to myself, all right, well, now I've got till the spring to organize people for opposition. And I'm doing my best to CC everyone on any emails I send, because I want everyone to hear what I'm saying, and I'm sending a lot of them between our neighbors, the boards, things like that. But I'll make this offer again. I know that working groups have been happening, not meetings, but working groups. I'm happy to be a part of those and come to those and share my concerns at a working group if anybody wants me there. But it's getting a little bit frustrating to keep coming back here, and it's starting to feel a bit circular. But I do appreciate all the work that everyone's done. I understand it. I think that the giant carrot that this board threw to Gordon and said, here's an illustrative plan, to not come back here and say, we love it. We want to stay here and here, so we got to cut off this section. We want to go forward with that. And instead come back and say, we want to shift our 98 units over here and over here. It's crazy, because I was going to fight the overlay district as it stood the way it stood anyways. And now the fact that it's getting changed, it's just making my job even easier. Frankly, we're going to be here in 2 years having the same discussion. And it is what it is. Until we get a developer in here who's willing to spend money and do studies and prove to people that what they're putting up on paper is actually and it's not, Emil and Jonathan did an incredible job drawing out this and put real thought into it. But to just go and take it and scratch this out and put this over here and this over here, tear it up, start from scratch. I mean, that sort of feels like where we're at to me.
Does anyone else wish to comment?
Anybody online?
Jack Davis, 57 Lois Street. Not a comment, but just a question of fact. Relative to the top of the hill, how high or how many stories can a developer go in terms of height on any new dwellings?
Code, right?
2 to 2.5.
Yeah, it's 35 feet.
35 feet.
35 feet midsection of the roof.
For residential.
Look at Willow Flats.
I don't see anything online.
Okay.
Okay, well, lots to think about. Thank you all for your attention and your comments. I think that my approach is going to be to have some discussion with John Whitten. I think that is going to be the first order of business. And as you all know, the overlay district has not been finalized. And if in fact we have developers, there is some logic to dealing directly with the developers as to their plans and for this site. than to try and deal in hypotheticals. So, anybody else want to say anything? So, thank you, Dr. Barnes. I think we'll be moving on to our next agenda items. So, the next agenda items include a discussion of the MBTA communities zoning, and also consideration of a form-based code downtown, including the Winthrop School. And there are other items mentioned here, but those are two key things. And both of those play into the master plan. So we have had some introduction to the MBTA communities law. That's Section 3A of Chapter 40A. I have had the opportunity to review that law and its associated regulations or proposed regulations, and the Attorney General's position with respect to the law. And the zoning law does indicate that communities shall adopt this type of as-of-right zone within a certain number of...
0.5 of a mile from the MBTA
Yes,
station.
0.5 of a
is
mile
that-
from the
Transportation.
MBTA.
Marty, is that wording from the Attorney General?
No, it's actually in the statute.
Yeah, it's
So shall is a legal term, which means is required.
It does, and that's what the Attorney General has indicated, that it is mandatory. And that, in fact,
Has she made a ruling to that effect, or is it an opinion?
she's issued an opinion that she will commence actions to enforce it if communities don't. But here's the language. An MBTA community shall have a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides for at least one district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right.
Okay.
Provided, however, that such multifamily housing shall be without age restriction and shall be suitable for families with children.
Guess that answers that question then.
And then it goes on, for the purposes of this section, a district of reasonable size shall, one, have a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, subject to any further limitations imposed by Section 40 of Chapter 131 and Title 5 of the State Environmental Code, etc. Be located not more than a half a mile from a commuter rail station, subway station, ferry terminal, or bus station if applicable. So that's that.
So
How is an MBTA community defined? As part of the, they pay,
No, train station.
Train station,
Subway
bus,
station,
yeah.
bus station.
Can you read this, the next section?
no
though,
choice.
about The
Right,
consequences.
it's
there any-
compulsory.
what?
It's compulsory.
If you have a train station, you're part of, or the,
You have a train station, commuter rail, or bus service from the MBTA.
Basically, if you don't do that, then you lose out on three sources of income. No, that's what it says after.
Well,
Well, that's
yeah,
what
we know
the
that, but-
statute says, but additional funding sources have been identified that
So,
will be available.
If I could share, I went on Wednesday after our last planning board session. Oh, John has his hand raised. I'm just going to share really quick. So I ended up being invited to hear an attorney who is actually very well educated on this and has been helping people who were interested in educating themselves. So right now, there's about 10 communities actively fighting. About 150 are sitting on the fence. And the others, it wasn't a heavy lift for them because they already have so much of it in place. They just complied. So, as Marnie read that, so then there's 3 funding sources that we would not be eligible for. Housing Choice Initiative, the Local Capital Projects Funds, and the Mass Works Infrastructure Program. They're now saying that we can't have access to 13 things, but that is not part of the actual law that was passed by the legislature. The legislature just wrote these 3 things. The DHCD, in consultation with the MBTA, is supposed to come up with guidelines to determine what an MBTA community is in compliance with this section. So it doesn't have a lot of the things, like the 721 is not actually in the legislation. They can't touch our Chapter 90 money, they can't which is road money, they can't touch our Chapter 70 money, which is school money. The MAPC had input from only 2,000 people out of a population of 3.5 million who are being impacted by this. Currently, this is the thing, Bill had said last time, maybe we should just wait. And this one thing that this attorney brought up, I thought was a great reason to go along with Bill's thing, was the Mass State Supreme Judicial Court has a case right now regarding sub-regulatory guidance under Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A. And this would impact the MBTA, but it's greater than that. And basically, it has greater ramifications, but if the way it looks like it's going, that the DHCD would lose or be part of that losing process. This would then, and John can confirm whether I'm saying what's right or clarify, but then my understanding is they're actually looking for amicus briefs right now on this topic. Okay, so if they lose in court, then it has to go back to the legislature. And if it goes back to the legislature, the coalition that put this together has disintegrated and there's backbiting, and he doesn't believe that there's going to be able to pass a law to actually say the things that the DHCD said. Does that make sense?
I'd like to hear what John has
Yeah,
to
let's
say.
hear what John has to say.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's an excellent summary, and that's absolutely right. Here's the real problem, and we've seen this before in 40B, and now we see it with the 3A legislation, and that is the regulations are not guidelines. What DHCD has promulgated are guidelines, and guidelines have no force in law. Guidelines are guidelines. They're not regulations. The legislation created the 15 unit per acre, but didn't define what the guidelines sought to define in terms of the minimum parcel size and the number of units that were required. So DHCD was not given the authority to promulgate regulations by the legislature, but rather was given the authority to promulgate guidelines. And guidelines are not regulations, they don't have the force of law. So it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz problem here, who's behind the curtain? And DHCD knows they've been caught. They're well aware, because communities across the Commonwealth have said exactly what we're saying right now, guidelines are not regulations. And it's the emperor with no clothes, and that's why the Attorney General had to come out with the very aggressive letter that they came out with. So it's well above my pay grade to provide the town with political advice here. Many communities have chosen to fight and stand up to this principle that guidelines and regulations are not in opposite, but they're very, very different. Had the legislature determined that DHCD had the authority to pass regulations, it would have provided that authority. It deliberately did not. The legislature knows what words to use, and they chose to use the word guidelines. Guidelines are not regulations. What the guidelines have done has tortured the statute, and we all know that that's impermissible. So where this goes, we don't know. The presumption is DHCD will ask the legislature for authority to promulgate regulations, but as it stands now, they have not. So I think what the planning board is really faced with is, I've reviewed the Bowler report, which is kind of lock, stock, and barrel, follows DHCD's guidelines for consultants that are doing this throughout the Commonwealth. And they have given you a number, 731 numbers, I think is the number, 731 units is the number. and query whether Hamilton could possibly construct 731 units within the geographic area 0.5 miles from the MBTA station. So I really think that you're in a very bad spot, as are all MBTA communities that are suburban cities or towns. So I think what we've seen other communities do who have resisted is they were threatened, not just with the 3 enumerated funding sources included in the statute, but far more. The town of Middleborough was held hostage in many respects to even further funding sources. So I think that's the risk here. And again, it's up to the town, kind of politically, how far you want to push it. But from a planning perspective, I don't know how you could comply without a wholesale rezoning within well beyond 0.5 miles of the train station. So Hamilton's in an awkward spot here, because the grant money that is the carrot to all this is a lot of dough. So, if I were to give you political advice, I'd say you don't want to burn bridges with DHCD, but by the same token, they're held to a higher standard, and that is to follow the law. They are not following the law. The legislation is quite clear, and the guidelines violate the legislation. And kind of from a basic constitutional premise, that's just wrong. And the cat's well out of the bag. Cities and towns are well aware of this. So I think, it's worth pursuing by right zoning if that's in the master plan, if that's the vision of the town. And it's certainly worth pursuing additional below market rate housing to improve your SHI and for other reasons. But whether you have to fully comply with the guidelines where they're inconsistent with the statute, that's really a whole nother story.
So question, John, so it sounds like a DHCD is out on the end of a limb that could be cut off by a judge. The Attorney General has taken an aggressive position interpreting the law, saying communities shall implement this zoning. So it sounds like this is going to end up in court challenging both the Attorney General and the DHCD. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, with just kind of one caveat. The legislation is not going to be overturned by the court. So the legislation, as codified in Section 3A, that requires by right zoning with a density of approximately 15 units per acre. What it doesn't say, however, is what that reasonable size is. And that's what they try to squeeze into the guidelines. So the legislature stated 15 units per acre within a half mile of the train station, but it did not state what that density must be. It is the guidelines that have articulated the density. And that's what has caused the consternation across the Commonwealth, because DHCD, in its wisdom, in the guidelines, have articulated what that minimum number of units is. That is not in the statute. So the statute will survive because it's the legislature and they're entitled to deference from the courts. But what's really on the ropes is the attempt to backdoor the density and the number of units through guidelines.
Are any towns and communities attempting to work together to challenge this? I mean, it would seem to me that if you had a number of cities and towns, or at least towns, in positions similar to Hamilton, joining together to share legal expenses, it would be more efficacious than having small towns like Hamilton with challenging budgets to try and undertake this kind of litigation on their own.
Yeah, what a great question, and it came up 15 years ago when there was a repeal effort on the ballot for 40B. Why aren't the suburban communities, or in fact some of the urban communities, why aren't we all collectively getting together and reform the statute? It's been in the books since 1969 with not one word change. It's horribly inconsistent with good planning. And My sad commentary, Marnie, is no. I don't know of communities that have banded together. MAPC communities would be a logical group. MAPC has not been out front with that kind of leadership, and we haven't seen any of the other RPAs doing it. So I'm not aware of any collective effort to reform what DHCD has tried to do. So no, I'm not aware of it. And it's really very frustrating because, again, as you know better than anybody, the Commonwealth still doesn't require comprehensive plans. So if we're not having cities and towns prepare plans, then how do we possibly hope to implement this kind of long-term legislation when cities and towns don't have a vision? You know, they're not required to put together a comprehensive plan and have zoning be consistent with the plan, but yet the legislature keeps doing this like they did with 40B in 1969. It's really very short-sighted, and we all know it because we're all kind of living this drama, which is get these mandates, but no support on these mandates to make them actually happen, locally or in a regional context.
At the meeting that I was at, there were 2 other planning board attendees from different planning boards. And I have their contact information if we wanted to. I know Manchester is definitely pushing back against this. So, but they may be taking a different avenue from what I remember. There was something different about their town bylaws, but there's definitely. And like we talked about last time with Bill, you know, Bill said, why don't we kind of wait because we're not forced to push this along at this point.
Well, I think waiting has got a different definition because we are master planning. I think that is what we're doing. I mean, I guess there's no benefit for the town of Hamilton to fight this on our own and take an opposition. It's impossible for us to conform to the regulations without doing some extreme acrobatics. But what we can do, and what I heard Jonathan seem like he's proposing for us to do, is continue on with the master planning effort and take our best shot at how does the zoning downtown look and what's the best thing for Hamilton in the meantime? And that's what we do. That's also kind of doing nothing, but we are master planning, so I think we are doing something.
Right.
We do have some things at risk here. I do know that HDC has submitted a MassWorks grant to the state. DHCD is typically part of the review entity that makes decisions on MassWorks grants.
How much is that grant for?
What was that number, Rick?
4.95 million.
Yeah, that's for downtown improvements. In addition to that, a year ago, the town received a letter from the Attorney General that the town should advise the Housing Authority to budget themselves for $11,000 less than their typical budget, based on that local projects fund that Beth had mentioned as one of the 3 pockets that they started out using as carrot and stick approaches. So, yeah,
So do we currently-
$11,000 for Hamilton Housing Authority is an awful lot of money. Makes a big difference to them in how they can or cannot keep their units livable in downtown.
So currently, do we access any of those funds? I know we have this proposal in, but have we ever received money from any of those?
To my knowledge,
I had been told by a past selectman.
only the local projects funding money that goes every year as part of the Housing Authority's budget.
Okay. Yeah, somebody who was a previous selectman said that we've never even used any of these monies when I brought this up originally to them, so.
Madam Chair, we have a hand raised in the audience.
Yes.
Can you go to the microphone?
Philip Lake, Hamilton resident. I have heard some different numbers, and maybe John can speak to this, about the governor and other agencies getting more involved with the stick component of this, taking away additional funds, and it's the power of the purse. So the latitude there, I suspect, is a lot broader than, the HCC's ability to write, treat guidelines as regulations. So I think probably you win the battle, but I'm not sure you lose the war. And so my recommendation would be for the town to really closely monitor what the state is proposing to take away from municipalities, including Hamilton, in order to force this process forward, just to keep track of it, just so you're not caught off guard.
Right.
Yeah.
John, I have a question for you. So in the legislation, the three things that are mentioned in the actual legislation are those three funding sources that I mentioned. Is there, in your mind, like legal ability for whoever it is, the DHCD or whoever, to add more funding sources
Yes.
that they can do that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what the prior speaker, I think, was
Yeah.
getting at, and that's what I observed in Middleborough, that the town had sought additional grant funding and was told that that funding would not be made available while they were out of compliance with the 3A requirements. So that is the fear. The state is big and the state is powerful, and there's 351 cities and towns, so Hamilton would be out on its own. And I think that's what has caused most communities to capitulate and at least file with DHCD for the initial compliance. The next round of compliance, of course, is not until the end of next year. And query what will happen in cities and towns where town meeting rejects or city council rejects the by right zoning. Then what's going to happen? So, I mean, this is the first stage of kind of the state telling cities and towns what to do, and that's what states get to do. They're the superior sovereign, and cities and towns have to follow their law. But in this context, it's going to be interesting to see what will happen if cities and towns don't comply, not because the select board or the city council is being arrogant or in the way, but the voters refuse to adopt it. And that's entirely possible. So yeah, I would be worried about taking the state on, because I think you will find that they will find other ways to not satisfy what you need because you're out of compliance with one of the Commonwealth's kind of biggest movers and shakers, and that is the housing industry. So that would be, I'd be giving you bad advice on that. I would not urge you to take on the Commonwealth. They're big, they're strong, they have unlimited resources.
Jonathan, what would be wrong with saying we're in compliance because we have 2 acres, 3 acres, some development within the transit area that is 15 units per acre, but we don't have, the 30 or 40 acres or whatever would be needed to provide 700 units at that density, under the grounds that that's the part of this regulatory process that it's not at all clear is, in effect, legal. And so we just say we are in compliance with the law, even if we're not in compliance with
Guidelines.
your regulations,
The guidelines.
Correct.
with the guidelines,
And that,
right? And so we're kind of hedging our bet a little bit there.
This is the question that I have. If you just comply with the statute, put the guidelines aside, and this is hypothetical, and you created an overlay district of sorts within a half a mile of the train station, and you have by right development, 15 units per acre, subject to site plan review, okay? We've done it. It can happen. That means a developer can come in and buy acreage and put 15 units per acre on whatever acreage it buys. But realistically, within a half a mile of the train station, there's the downtown commercial area, and there's single-family homes. And the only real open space that we have within that area is the Winthrop School, the area in front of the public safety building, and potentially areas on Willow Street where Welch and Lamson is and Dodge Tree. Those are the only areas in town that have any kind of open space at all that would permit construction of multifamily dwellings. And then at some point, even if an odd lot or two came up, there's no way that Hamilton's can build 731 units. I mean, Route 1A would not be able to handle that number of units coupled with the 300-plus that Wenham has to build.
Right.
I mean, the road is simply would not be able to handle it. And I don't know if any septic system could be designed that could handle that amount of waste other than tight tanks. So as a practical matter, you could conceivably comply with the technical requirement of the statute.
Right.
Forget the guidelines and just say it's an impossibility to build.
Or we make the
700.
development subject to a special permit because we don't know.
Yeah.
It can't, it has to be as
It
of-
has
Yeah,
to
it has to
by
be by right.
Yeah.
And frankly, and you put your finger nicely onto
Yep.
the conundrum that their guidelines put us under. But interestingly enough, our downtown business district does effectively allow for unlimited residential density.
Right, and
It
here,
allows that, and we have a really good example at 59 Willow Street.
so my next thought as you were saying that was, I'm wondering if you can parse this, and because the commercial district is 12 acres, we need approximately 48 acres. I'm throwing this out.
To meet the guidelines, not the law.
Hold
Not
on,
the
hold
law.
on, hold on. Hypothetically, make the 48 acres part of the commercial district and say, we already have it. And you're done. So I'm
That's-
wondering, John, can you sort of try and say, listen, we've already got, as cities have already done, say, listen, the acreage around the MBTA, the 500-foot radius, is already zoned commercial and allows an unlimited number of units per acre. And it's subject to site plan review. And we have no septic that would ever allow that kind of density anyway, so it's kind of a moot point.
The statute and the guidelines are really paper tigers because, and this is what you've both just said, if you have the zoning available through the guidelines, the largest parcels possible, and you meet the density requirements of the statute and the guidelines, but the units can never get constructed, you've still complied with the guidelines and the statute. So that is an approach that cities and towns can take. We see this with the Housing Appeals Committee in 40B. The Housing Appeals Committee keeps overturning ZBA decisions and approving projects that can't get built because they either can't get a groundwater discharge permit or they can't get other permits that are necessary, and nobody seems to care. It's really just checking off the box.
Okay.
So if Hamilton makes available land in compliance with the guidelines in the statute, you've satisfied your obligation. If those units cannot get built, that's not Hamilton's cross to bear. This whole thing seems so foolish and so naive, but that's the way they've drafted this.
Okay,
You
I
are
like
not
it.
under an obligation to produce the units. You're under an obligation to make the land available for the production of the units.
Right, and
So-
somebody else has to build the units. The town doesn't
So
have to
under
build
the
units.
law, though, we could actually say with the 12 acres we have right now that
No,
we
no, no, no,
are
no, no, no,
compliant.
you-
No, because the 50 acre.
Oh, hold on, girl. What I'm saying is, the 12 acres doesn't cut it, because it doesn't encompass the 500-foot radius. What I'm
That's
saying-
not in the law.
Yes, well,
The
that.
point-
That's
no,
in the
no,
guidelines.
Hold on. It's in the guidelines. The guidelines are up for interpretation in lawsuits. This could go on for years. What I'm trying to do is get around all that and just say, listen, within that 500-foot radius, we make it part of the commercial district. As John said, they can build an unlimited number of units, in theory, but the land is either not available or you can't get the septic for that level of density, but you've met the intent of that bylaw and you're free and clear.
I just get concerned that at some point, somebody will try to do it, and it's already in place, and if we already have the 12 acres, that seems, it says a district of reasonable size.
I'm
So-
saying the district is 500-foot radius. That
No,
is
that's
the.
not what it says
No,
in the
no,
law.
that's not what it
A district of
says.
reasonable size is what the law says.
We're obeying the law if
not
we take
more
the
than-
downtown district and say, you know, we already have this, it's
I get
12
it. I
acres,
get it.
that meets the law.
I get it.
It doesn't meet the guidelines because it's not enough land area. But that's a guideline as opposed to the law.
My understanding, John, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they have arbitrarily drawn a circle around the center of the MBTA station and said 500 feet circumference around that MBTA station is the area that has to have the zoning. Am I wrong or am I right?
So the guidelines include a 0.5 mile, half a mile radius around the station. So that was to be the focal point of where the by right zoning is to occur.
Okay.
You
so
can,
it's-
you can go beyond that, but that was the focus. Draw an arbitrary circle of a half a mile radius, and here's where the land area should be. You know, and on paper that it has some attractiveness because it's focused. It wouldn't be scattered. But again, that's the guidelines. The statute is the reasonable size. You know, the statute, it had left room for cities and towns to interpret that on their own.
Okay,
The guidelines did otherwise.
okay,
Right. The statute says at least one district of reasonable size
okay.
located not more than half a mile from the commuter rail
All
station.
right, so,
So the
Doesn't
current
say how
business
large
district
it-
meets that.
so the 12 acres does meet that.
Which seems reasonable based
So,
on.
John, can we argue that?
I think you can, and I think this just gets back to what other cities and towns are doing as well. You'll never be able to accomplish the 731. So I think it's a little bit like the 40B fights. Do the best you can for what you want in the plan. It's your plan, and accommodate as much of the pushback from the state as possible, but it's Hamilton's master plan.
Right.
You can't accomplish what they have required you to do through the guidelines, but you can accomplish what the statute has required.
Okay,
And that should be, in my opinion, that should be done consistent with the planning goals of the town.
Kind of back to
So,
that.
Yep,
okay.
we all agree.
So, I like that. So we have two potential options. One is go with what we have or, you know, expand it if needed.
If needed. But there's nothing, the other aspect of this, and a real important question, is that in a broader context, to the extent that the planning board is looking at a form-based code for the downtown that would extend as far as the Winthrop School, there's nothing inconsistent with the form-based code, provided, if necessary, it's as of right, with this MBTA communities law. They can work, they can be the belt and suspenders, if you will, so that we can use the form-based code to actually protect the character of the town.
and Marnie, that's exactly right. And because, and this goes way back, I think when I first met Emil and Jonathan, form-based code is designed to be by right. So the design is articulated by town meeting, and then developers follow that design. So form-based code would work here, and you would be able to impose form-based code because it's by right, not by special permit. So yes, it's a long-winded agreement with Marnie, and that would be a really good and productive use of form-based code, because that's exactly what the legislation requires. It has to be by
So this
right.
is something that I'm hoping that the Barrett and Associates, their representative who's been dealing with the Master Plan Steering Committee hears this. But how best then to go forward with implementing these three things? And I think that basically the MBTA communities and the master plan really should drive a form-based code, because I think that given what is likely to transpire down the road, that is the only way that Hamilton can remain as Hamilton, and then also be proactive when land becomes available, to make sure that the character of the town is not ruined by untoward development. How would we go about then going forward with satisfying Section 3A and integrating the form-based code into it? Should the planning board just take the bull by the horns and draw a map? I mean,
Well, that's a sort of a legal question that probably John can help us with. We've already got a preliminary, we've already said we've got a preliminary plan, so we've,
right, we're not at risk at the moment,
Right.
yeah.
So I'm wondering then, to answer your question, Marnie, is should we send back and say, listen, we've already got a downtown 12 I believe it's 12 acres, already zoned reasonable size for unlimited number of housing units per acre, and say, we've met the intent of the statute, then move on with the form-based code. So the question is, I guess, John, how do we make that representation to DHCD or whomever it is that we need to do and get a response?
You only need to, I mean, putting aside the grant applications that the town may be seeking, you only need to comply with the statute by the end of next year for full compliance.
Yep.
So as long as you're moving forward, and I would say more importantly with the plan and how you wanted to treat the downtown in the plan, you are working toward compliance with 3A. I think there should be an open admission by the town that you cannot comply with the guidelines, or you seek not to comply, however you want to phrase that. And that's a very politically fraught discussion, but worth having. But the town is committed to complying with the statute. I think that's an appropriate response. And here's how we're complying with the statute. And here it is within the plan. So a chapter within the plan articulates compliance with 3A. And that is, much like a chapter in the plan in your affordable housing element would discuss compliance with 40B. Now you need to also include compliance with 3A. And you've discussed already, just in a few minutes, one way to comply with 3A, and that is to expand the availability within the commercial area within a half mile of the train station.
Right.
So I mean, I think, Rick, to answer your question directly, I think just keep going on the plan, because as long as the plan addresses the 3A requirements, then you will be in compliance with 3A.
Right.
John, just a clarification. Following this current conversation about the downtown area, that would mean then that the form-based code would have to sort of, in a sense, mandate a future housing capacity in the downtown area of 15 per acre in some reasonable size location. So you're essentially mandating that in the future, because any change to an existing property, it's not like it will never happen. It will happen when there's a reinvestment in a property, and that building that's there now in the downtown comes down. Now they're obliged to put up a 15 unit per acre building or group of buildings on that lot. Am I correct? So essentially,
Why will they be obliged? They won't be obliged. They'll be
It's a
able
form-based.
to. That's different. They'll be able to put a 15 unit per acre building up.
But they don't have to.
But they don't have to.
Correct.
And the economics of it are really quite questionable. Ability and requirement are very different.
I think the trick would be to keep the form-based code flexible enough that it doesn't require.
something else could happen there.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's not restricted to
Right.
that housing.
Right.
That's what I'm.
Right.
Yeah. And Emily, just to respond to your question, the form-based code is an option. The applicant could choose that option, or there could be special permit options as well. So as long as to meet the 3A requirements, there has to be a district that includes by right housing. But that doesn't mean that the district couldn't have other uses by special permit.
Yeah.
So as long as there is at least the allowable use rather by right, then it could include, the district could include additional special permit uses. So you wouldn't necessarily be locking the future of that commercial district forever into the form-based code option. A developer or landowner could choose other options as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the use aspect is less important than the actual shape of the building and location and so forth. So that would be,
Sounds like we've got some parsing to do.
yeah.
Well, and if the SJC comes back and says that these, they can't, those guidelines aren't laws, we're still just, if we focus on complying with the statute, that's what we have to do anyways.
Right.
And if the SJC comes back and says we are, you know, they do have more authority, then I don't know, we may have to change it. But if they come back and they say, which is what this attorney really felt like this wasn't gonna stand, not the MBTA, but just all these different guidelines that are happening, then we're fine if we just focus on the statute.
I have a question, Patrick, and maybe you can answer it. How was the 731 units determined? Did someone from the Commonwealth come and draw a radius of a half a mile around the train station?
Yeah.
Calculate the acreage and then
They have a
multiply it
formula.
by 15?
They have a formula that excises out municipal land area and other areas that are unbuildable. Say, for instance, roads, say, for instance, public safety building. If schools are intended to be actively used, that's another municipal use that is off of the table and can't be counted. They are willing to count school property that is to be transitioned, and we've made the recommendation that the Winthrop School property be part of that. So that gives us, with downtown being 27 acres, Winthrop School being 14 acres, we only need a little bit more beyond that.
Yeah, times 15, and you get 721.
You
add up all the
we
land.
don't- You know, the term that John used, paper tiger, is what I think that we have to really understand. It's sort of a game because the state wants us to put in place the zoning overlay in a way that has the potential to allow for the development, but the likelihood of the vast majority of these properties in downtown transitioning to this type of development with these minuscule parcel sizes, it's not going to happen. But we still have to go through the exercise of preparing it and taking it to town meeting. Right, John?
Yeah, no. I think, again, I don't want to overstep my pay grade here. I think you comply as best you can. And, you know, you're in good company with a whole bunch of cities and towns east of 128 that cannot make these numbers according to the guidelines, might be able to do it according to the statute.
Right.
Right, I think that's the way we have to do it. Just say, hey, we're meeting the intent of the statute.
Right.
Your guidelines are not.
And it's also a thought that that court case is probably gonna
Yeah, but that
come.
could be years away.
No, well, he was saying he feels like it would probably be within the next year, so that would still get us before the end of next December, which is when we need to have it anyways.
Okay, Madam Chair, what happens next?
Oh, well, the only other thing I'd like to talk about tonight, and the MBTA communities does play into it, but I thought for the benefit of the Master Plan Steering Committee, that the Planning Board might consider.
Before you move off that MBTA,
Could you use the microphone?
I just want to get that to see if I could. Dave Dashkin, 215 Woodbury Street. I mean, obviously, the MBTA and adjoining Winthrop School property, I think you can put a large septic system, private wastewater treatment plant, public wastewater treatment plant in that case, the town would probably operate it. just like on the size or greater, have to be greater than the one that's across the street from where I live, at the Gordon Conwell. And, they're currently proposing, it's got 209 housing units now, 109 dorms. They're proposing to put another 100 housing units there. So you're talking about probably on the order of, even the dorms, like these close to 400 now on that property. So why not downtown as well? If you're just worried about changing the character, you're not worried about changing the character of my neighborhood. Change downtown as well.
So,
Thank
do
you.
we need John to stay with us, or can we let him go?
I think maybe, John, you can, if you have other more important things to do.
I have nothing better to do.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
I just wanted to talk a bit about our short-term and long-term priorities. So in terms of our short-term priorities, I think that obviously the regulations that go with the stormwater management bylaw are really close to the top of the list. I think we have to keep considering the Browns Hill Overlay District. And then I think there's MBTA communities, and the form-based code for the downtown really should concern us because of the risk that this town faces if we were to just let things happen. Hamilton could just be altered in ways that would might trigger an exodus of a lot of people from town. So those are my what I think might be actions that should occupy us within the next year. But then on a longer term, there are other endeavors that could occupy our time, including revisiting the flexible development bylaw, considering amendments to the open space and farmland preservation development bylaw, the Great Estate Overlay District bylaw. The list could go on. What?
So
Sorry, Rick.
you're proposing we work 365, 24/7?
Something like that,
Yeah.
But, I think that it is important that we, formulate some short-term and long-term goals, because the master plan, as you may know, Rick, is approved by the planning board. So we're basically approving our work. So I'd like to hear what the rest of you have to say about what I just outlined, short-term and long-term.
Are we getting any kind of presentation from the steering committee or any kind of
Well,
interaction?
I'm glad you brought that up. At some point, we will definitely have to make some type of presentation. I had Patrick send around some information, the goals and vision that are in draft form. But on October 28th at 1 o'clock, the Barrett and Associates is conducting a workshop of sorts to get more public input. So that is part of the package. So I would encourage all of you to go, because as planning board members, we have a lot of influence as to the direction of the town, primarily because if it involves zoning at all, we're the body that actually will be involved in drafting whatever the zoning bylaw is and getting it approved at town meeting. So we have a position of probably supreme importance in the town to approve the master plan, but then actually to implement critical components of it.
Is this going to be, will this be recorded? I'm out of town, so do we know if they're going to record this session?
I believe it will be.
I'm making arrangements with HW Cam to
Thanks.
do that.
Great. What?
But just to add to your list, Marnie, I wonder whether, because this was touched on, whether
Do you know
we
how
should have some interaction with Wenham Planning.
Oh, right, exactly. That's with respect to the MBTA
With
respect to the
communities,
MBTA,
especially in the
especially.
form-based code, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, and you know, I thought at some point the master plan had some type of encouragement of regional planning, and really, Hamilton and Wenham are so tied at the hip, it only makes sense. Anybody else have any ideas?
We have a public comment.
I just think, sorry. Nancy Dashkin, 215 Woodbury Street. The comments about the master plan really resonate with respect to what's going on at what we're calling Browns Hill, the seminary, and what could be going on if the Winthrop School is no longer a school, and keeping that character of Hamilton. And, you know, yes, our neighborhood, I live on Woodbury Street, I mean, it's going to change. And if it's carefully changed and managed, that'll make a huge difference than if it's just sort of let happen, which I don't think will, but after 2 years of this, I don't know anymore. But I think remembering that, and for the town to know how important that master plan is to keep the integrity of what Hamilton has been and is, and not just look at dollars and cents for one group or another, is really critical.
Right, so
I just want to bring that up. I think that master plan is a very important component for not just my neighborhood and my issues, but for the town itself.
right, and I encourage you to go to that meeting. It's at the middle school on October 28th, next Saturday at 1 p.m. And really, it's the master plan should reflect what the citizens of Hamilton want, and to the extent feasible. I mean, obviously, when you have state mandates, that's difficult. But it really is important that people's voices be heard. And we know from past experience, sometimes at town meeting, the loudest voices get the action. And-
Marty, that was exactly the point I was hoping to make, and I know probably it's too late for this comment, but this comment resonated last time a meeting like this occurred, that I wasn't able to attend because I was coaching a soccer game. Youth sports are happening during the times that these meetings are being scheduled, and when you're talking about town voices and developing downtown schools, I would expect the parents would want something to say as a part of that process.
Pat,
And
the
these are
problem is you
smack
can't-
dab in the middle of
You can't have it
sports.
after school, because kids play sports after school, and most families with children, they can't go to 7 o'clock meetings, so there's never a good time.
There's never a good time, I understand
never
that,
a
but this is especially, I believe,
It would be good to have a variety.
a terrible time. You know, these are exceptionally terrible times. After school is much easier to organize. We have multiple babysitters on staff, and that's normally how it goes. But it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to get. I know the voices. We talk about what the town hears, but it's typically the people that don't have the time to go to these things. Those are the voices you hear. So I think more care in how these get scheduled.
Well, we were told, because Dana Alera, she's chair of the school committee, someone said that the activity is later in the afternoon, some Halloween type activity.
Well, that's
So-
the school activity, but they weren't talking about youth sports.
Yeah, every
So that's the
kid
different
is
thing. So there was
doing
nothing
stuff
at the
during this
school.
time on the weekends usually. But
Well, anyhow,
sidebar comment.
sorry.
There is a visioning session this week too. I mentioned it last time. There's for the Cutler School. It seems to be an initiative that Eric Tracy, the school superintendent, is driving, and I think that's strange, but that is what's happening, and I'm hoping to attend.
What days are those?
Thursday night.
Thursday?
They've already done one.
Okay.
This is the second one in the evening on Thursday, but it's a strange, I guess I'd be curious to see what the process is, because it is strange that the school superintendent is driving a development discussion.
They've hired it.
Well,
No, actually, it's not. Who else do you expect to be
Right.
leading that?
Well, they've selected an architect, right?
Yeah.
Yes, this is my point. It's a proposal
Yeah.
for something that, it's like, what, it is strange, because the superintendent is expertise is in the education, not development.
He's leading, just as we have, hiring consultants as required by the MSBA. The whole process is laid out on the school website in terms of what's happening, schedule, and why. So I would suggest looking at it. This isn't something that's being pulled out of the thin air. This is a process required by the Mass School Building Authority.
No, and Patrick sent around
Right.
a report,
Yeah,
which
I'm
was...
trying to follow. My point is, it's a curious thing for me to get now involved and start reading, because I understand that it's there, and I'm reading it, and I'm trying to make sense of it all, and it's just interesting process. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Right. Well, any more comments about our short-term goals versus our long-term goals?
I have a question for a new business item for tonight,
Sure.
which is, there's been a new filing for Tobacco Woods,
Right.
and I'm questioning whether we should go into executive session to discuss it, even though that petition goes before the Zoning Board of Appeals. It does involve us, or could involve us, and I
Well,
would prefer to discuss this in executive session, I think.
It actually does involve us, because the town bylaw requires as a courtesy that it comes.
Yes, we would have to, yeah.
I have been in contact with Robin Stein. I have a number of questions about the 40B project eligibility letter application and the status of any of the pending appeals, so
Right.
there are nuances.
I looked over the proposal very carefully too, and how it was different. But I'm not sure that we should discuss that over the
It's not
air.
on the agenda, so
It's not on the agenda. I don't think that executive session would be the appropriate forum anyway, because executive session for public bodies usually has to do with property acquisitions or
Or court cases, and the case in point,
human resource matters.
we'll have to determine that. I mean, that's one of the questions. It's what happens with the pending litigation. So it
Right.
may or may not be something that we need to discuss in executive session. So that, it's to be determined, but I'm aware of that, so.
And then maybe you already all saw, I sent out an email around, today was the last day to comment on, there was, I guess there's a conflict often with wetlands and 40B, kind of like John Witten was saying, a lot of times you can have certain regulations and then because 40B, so there's some bill in the House right now that they're trying to, I think, strengthen some of the wetlands things.
Yeah,
I
but
don't
that
know.
won't matter, because it's been filed and it's grandfathered under existing.
Right, I'm not even talking about the tobacco. I just shared that because I thought that was helpful for us to just be aware of, so.
So I
mean,
think,
yeah.
sorry, I apologize.
That's okay.
The last order of business, we have some minutes to approve. I don't know if you all have had an opportunity to review the minutes.
I reviewed them, and I think I have to legally change my name to a variety of different spellings, both my first name and my last name, so I'll work on that.
I have had a heart-to-heart regarding the spelling, so.
Why don't we just call you JP?
There you go.
I missed.
Jonathan Witten seems to have an issue getting an H somehow in his last name frequently as well.
Yeah, so I probably have not caught all of those misspellings. But I went through these. I tried to make my edits in a way that were reasonably legible. And we have some different approaches. We could approve the minutes and I can give my edits, and anybody else can give their edits to Patrick, and he can send them on to the person who did the minutes, and then we can, once those changes are made, we can approve them at a subsequent meeting. We could approve them now on the understanding that the edits will be made. So I leave it to you. My edits were really not substantive. They were more just catching typos and consistency and capitalization and just some punctuation. There were periods missing and that kind of stuff. So they're not substantive, but there are some misspellings and that type of stuff.
And your corrections are included here?
No.
Okay.
No,
Sorry, I didn't know that.
I just made them to the,
Other than what I just mentioned, I have no substantive comments on the content.
where was your first name spelled wrong?
Oh, well, it's sometimes in the same paragraph, it's spelled different ways. Like, it's Jonathan, and then in the previous paragraph, it's Jonathan.
Oh,
And then
where-
sometimes there's an E, and sometimes there isn't an E. So it's Thon and Than, and
I missed them. I was looking for your last name.
Check.
Really?
just a visual scan for consistency.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Does it really matter that much? I don't know.
well,
I think we know who you are.
Having an identity crisis.
Not on our watch.
You good? Thank you.
it is Jonathan Poor. I'll make a special note of that. Does anybody else have anything?
No.
So I'm getting the sense that no one wants to see these minutes ever again.
No.
So I would entertain a motion that we approve the minutes subject to the,
What's the date?
okay, April 27th, August 1st, August 15th, and September 19th.
You're including that in your vote.
There's
Yes.
an August 1st?
August 1st.
April 27th, August 1st, August 15th, and September 19th.
There is an August 1st meeting, minutes.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
Okay. Well, we're not approving that?
yes, we're approving all four,
All four, okay.
subject to the edits that I have made on the minutes themselves being made.
I make that motion?
A second.
When I call your name, please indicate whether you approve. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. And there were two sets of minutes from the last meeting, I think July 11th and September 7th. They do need to come back to us, and I sent off the corrections for those minutes. And I'll give these to Patrick. And then we can sign our documents. So does anybody have anything else to bring
Oh, we
before
can't
the
sign the
board?
documents.
Why not?
I said we can on the
Yeah.
way out.
Yeah.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second?
Second?
That was like fifths, not seconds.
Like sevenths.
Okay, when I call your name, Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Both are aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
Marnie Crouch, aye.
See you, Matt. Good night.
Bye, everyone.